we're going to go with what we got. All right. Now the question is, where is my own presentation? There it is. All right, setting up your apiary. I'm trying to remember the kids' names in my group. Eighth? I don't remember. I'm sorry. Miles. What's your name? Trevor. You're in the youth group? Okay. You have the beat HUD set up and all that stuff from us? Okay. All right. Basically, this class is everything about where you put your hives on your property, and what you put them in and locating them and all that good stuff. This is one of the few classes that we do that does not deal with the Holy Trinity of beekeeping. I don't even have a slide for the Holy Trinity of beekeeping, but what is it? It's for you two guys. You guys should know. You should know I'm going to ask this every single month, right? There's three things. What was that? I think it was right. Feeding and nutrition is one. Second one, pest and disease control is two. A productive queen is three. This class doesn't deal with any of those. This might be the only class that we do this. So basically, there are a whole bunch of different things to consider when you're trying to figure out where you're going to put your hives. And I've got slides for each one of these, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. It's the law, being a good neighbor, etc. Okay, the first thing, the law. Being legal, that's the first thing you need to worry about. For people that live in Bryan-College Station, it is legal to keep your hives in town as far as the city ordinances are concerned. In Texas, it is legal if you live outside of an incorporated area, like out in the county. All counties in Texas are that way. There are no restrictions if you live outside of an incorporated area. If you live in an ECJ, what's that called? An extraterritorial jurisdiction, which is within a couple of miles, there's still county rules, but you need to kind of be aware that the city may encroach on you sometime in the future. We live 800 yards from the city limit sign, so eventually they're going to get us. If you do live inside of the city limits, or actually even if you live outside the city limits, if you live in a neighborhood with an HOA, well, first thing, I'm sorry. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. We moved out of town to get away from HOAs. But secondly, HOAs will frequently have rules that, you moved into the neighborhood, so you are part of their rules. If you live in an HOA and you know how those go, I would suggest before you get your hives, you might want to check on those rules, or at least be really good at not telling people what's in your backyard. Also, if you're in a neighborhood, and this says in town, but there are rural neighborhoods too. Basically, it means you have neighbors that are close. Being a good neighbor kind of preempts all the other, they're not rules, but they're guidelines, to quote Pirates of the Caribbean. Thank you. People laugh at my jokes tonight. This is great. If you have neighbors, being nice to them kind of preempts everything else as far as the rules about where you're going to put your hives. For example, bees tend to go to the nearest water source. So if that nearest water source is your neighbor's swimming pool, you probably ought to give them at least a bird bath feeder to, give them a little bit of water between. Now, the bees are probably still going to go to your neighbor's swimming pool, but at least you're doing your due diligence. If you don't necessarily want to put your beehives right on the property line and face them out away from yours, so that they come out in the morning and head straight into your neighbor's backyards, that's not nice. Some towns, our towns don't actually have regulations about fences and barriers to bees. A lot of towns do. Even if we don't, it's not necessarily a bad idea. So, if you can put a fence not far from where your entrance to your beehives are, so that the bees have to get up and get some altitude before they cross your neighbor's property, because, they do fly. They're going to go anywhere they want. At least they're not going to be like buzzing them at 2 foot off the ground. Um, it's just being nice to your neighbors. And then later on, after you start collecting honey, you know, giving them a jar of honey sometimes might be a good thing to do. Um, I actually said something about putting up a barrier. Probably the most important thing you do if you have neighbors, though, is keeping a close eye on the temperament of your bees. Um, I live on 6.5 acres, but I have 53 acres right next to me that if I have a hive that's like really aggressive, I can put them in the middle of the 53 acres and they can be aggressive. They're not going to hurt anybody. Um, I can't do that if I have bees in a backyard. So if your bees start getting a little testy, I'm sure there's going to be other classes about it. In fact, we may talk about it at the 7 o'clock meeting tonight. Things like requeening your hive or splitting your hive and doing all kinds of stuff like that to settle them back down. If your hives are really nasty and you have to do something right now, having a place that you can pick up your hive and move it out of town, at least temporarily, is a good backup plan to have in your back pocket. Okay. These are in no particular order now. But to me, this one is like the first key thing you want to keep in mind. And I call it not too close and not too far. In other words, where do you put your hives on your property? Basically, you're going to want your hives far enough away from the house that they're not causing problems for you. You don't want them right next to your front door or your windows, especially the flight path that the bees come in and out of. On the other hand, you don't want to put them so far out that you can't keep an eye on them. I know that the kids in our youth program have been out to our house. I don't think you guys have. You guys haven't. You haven't, have you? My hives are along my front fence line, which is, how far away would you say that is, Danny? Probably 80 yards, give or take. But we have other things in our yard that are close to them too, like her garden, or her garden used to be. We're moving that. But the idea is that you want them close enough that as you're doing daily routine things, not involving your bees, occasionally being able to look over at them, especially a day like today where it was warm, if somewhat cloudy, the bees have come in and out. So you can kind of look over and, see some activity coming in and out, and okay, they're doing okay. I don't need to worry about them. On the other hand, if you look over and you don't see any activity coming in and out, that might prompt you to go take a look at them sooner than you would as if they were, 500 yards away or on the back 40. It also applies to how far away from each other you want to space your hives. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. If you talk to Justin Russell next door, who's a commercial beekeeper, he will put his hives on pallets and put 4 of them on a single pallet. But then he will space his pallets out a little bit too. Basically, what you're doing is you're trying to give yourself enough room to work your hives so that you're not, bumping into things over here when you're working this hive. You're also trying to cut down on a little bit of robbing issues. If you have 2 hives that are right next to each other and one of them is really strong, the big population, and the other one is a brand new hive that only has like 3,000 bees, odds are that strong hive is going to come over and rob out all the honey from the weak hive and end up killing them off. That's not something you want to have happen. In a little bit, I'll show you a picture of what mine look like. Generally, I have about 1.5 to 2 foot between my hives. And that's as much so that when I pull the lid off, I can set it down between the hives, or I can hang a frame hanger between them and not have to worry too much about, bumping into stuff and getting things in the way. It gives me room to work. Not too close, not too far. This is probably a little too close. Uh, if think you should move your hives closer, okay. Um, Obviously, that I found this picture and I just thought that was hilarious. You can tell that these are brand new beekeepers too by a couple of things. Uh, Anybody want to make a guess at what the clues are? And their bee suits are clean. That's the big giveaway. Oh, really? I can't. What's that? Oh, flip flops. Yes. The other thing, Dale, can you get rid of that message in there? Oh, there it goes. It went away. If you look at the feeder in front of the hive, those entrance feeders, those are typically something new beekeepers use. People that are more experienced tend to move away from those feeders after a while. Okay. On the other hand, if you have to get binoculars out to see your hives, um, now this is in all honesty, this is probably a farm, and they probably don't even live there. I bet they're renting these hives for pollination, and so they just got them way back in the back. But still, it's a funny illustration. I thought it was a funny illustration. Um, okay, other considerations: pets and animals. Pets. Again, if you live in town or you're putting your hives in a backyard, that's okay. But if your backyard is fenced, you don't want your dog to share the same fenced backyard that your beehives do, because dogs do learn pretty fast. But if they get over there and bother the bees and get them upset, then if the bees come after them, the dogs don't have anywhere to get away. And some hives, if they were really bad, they could kill the dog, and nobody's happy about that. Um, now, if you live out in the country and dogs happen to run up to them, and as long as the dogs can get away, yeah, you're probably okay. You just don't want the hives in the same enclosure as other animals. If you have livestock, uh, for the most part, bees and livestock leave each other alone. You don't really have to worry about it. There are some livestock that, like horses and cattle, that love to rub. So if they have a tree or something hard, they'll come up and rub and trying to get the flies off of them. They see a beehive there, they're probably going to come up and try and rub on it, and that'll knock the beehive over. And now your bees are upset. They will get the cattle upset. Horses are like that. Goats are like that. Goats like climbing on top of the beehives for some reason. They'll stand on top of them. It's another reason I don't like goats. I've never really had any problem with wild animals, including feral pigs. Um, we've got feral pigs out where we live. In fact, one of the guys that lives with us, he's a hockey player, just found a big pig skull this week, that big tusks and stuff. But we've never had pigs mess with our hives. Um, Poultry, generally chickens. Our chickens completely ignore the hive, and the hives pretty much completely ignore the chickens, except for this time of the year, because the chicken feed that my wife throws out, it sits in the pan, and after a while it'll get into powder. Well, that chicken feed is pretty much pure protein. The bees are looking for pollen, which is their protein, so they'll start coming and collecting the chicken feed as their pollen source. The chickens still ignore the bees, even in the feed bucket. Um, Now, other birds will sit there and eat your bees. Turkeys, guinea fowl. Turkeys, I've heard, will just sit there right at the entrance to your beehive and just make a meal on them as they come out. So if you got bigger birds, you probably want to fence your birds away from your hives. I thought you had a question. Um, Other wildlife like skunks and raccoons and stuff like that. Generally, as long as you keep your hives up off the ground far enough and put a brick on the lid, those aren't going to be a problem. Exposure to sunlight. In other words, do you put your hives in a shady spot or do you put them out in the open? Um, if you look on the internet, um, a lot of the advice that you get is for places that are other areas of the country. And they'll have all kinds of things like, you know, you have to build wind blocks and you have to face them a certain direction and all that stuff. Those really aren't nearly that important. Um, Basically, the one thing that you do, there are two factors that you need to keep in mind when you're talking about shade versus sunlight. One, a couple of the pests that do get into hives, namely small hive beetles especially, uh, and wax moths too, they do not like a lot of sunlight, and they don't like the heat. Now bees don't necessarily like hot temperatures, but they can tolerate it better than small hive beetles do. Um, the other thing is small hive beetles really like damp, moist areas. So if you have them up, like my hives are up kind of on a hill, and when it does rain, all the water drains away. So the ground tends to be pretty dry most of the year, even not long after a rain. Um, the contrast to that is it gets really hot in the summer for us. So, if you're out having to open up your beehives, even at, you know, 11 o'clock in the morning and it's 95 degrees in July, that's not a lot of fun. So some shade is generally a good idea for us. Um, the kind of the rule of thumb that I like is, if possible, if you can give the bees some afternoon shade so that they get morning sunshine hitting them, uh, and then the shade hits them in the afternoon, that's generally your best case scenario. The other part is you kind of want your hives, you don't know what a drip line for trees is, the canopy of the trees, the rain hits it, it's the outside edge of the trees. You kind of want your hives outside the drip line. Um, that's not a hard and fast rule. You can break that if you need to. There are other things that might be more important depending on what your property looks like, though. Protection from the wind. I kind of talked about this a little bit. Uh, we don't get blizzards here, last week notwithstanding. Uh, I loved it. In fact, I think most of us took pictures of our beehives covered up in snow. Um, the funny thing, I actually have a lot of friends who are in Alaska Beekeepers Facebook group. And so I put a picture of my beehives in their group and told them to come get their weather because, their weather was drunk. But they live with that all winter long. So they sometimes do have to do stuff like wind blocks or other things to keep their hives from getting too cold. Uh, we don't. Last week's snow is not harmful to the bees at all. I did not go out and cover my hives. I didn't put an extra hay bales around them to block the wind or anything like that. Really, the only thing you need to be concerned with is making sure that if it does get really windy, like, we do have some 60-mile-an-hour winds last week too. You don't want the wind blowing your hives over. So if you have to strap them down, strap them down. Most of the time, just putting bricks on top of the lid is good enough. The other thing is when we do get a wind blowing cold rain, it tends to come from the north. So if you can face your hives so that the entrance is pointing the opposite direction, the cold rain is not going to blow into your hives. The other thing you can do is give your hives normally we like them real level, but if you can give them just a slight little tilt forward so that if any water does get into your hive, it just runs out the entrance, then they'll be fine. And I just talked about all that right there. Protection from pesticides. This is one of the other things that you might need to be concerned with. Especially in Brazos County, there's a lot of agricultural stuff that goes around, especially down in the river bottom where they have cotton growing. Um, Now, what they spray for the cotton is typically um, defoliants. It's herbicides, so it's not pesticides. It's still not good for the bees. And they're supposed to control their aerial spraying so that it doesn't drift across property lines. That's probably why they fly so low, but it's still going to drift some. So if you live out in an agricultural area like that, you probably don't want to put your hives right on the edge of your property where drift can happen. Now, if your bees, cotton is actually, bees will make a lot of honey from cotton. Cotton is a good crop for bees. Um, but if they did just spray out there, even pesticides, if your bees leave your hive and go out and get into those pesticides, almost all of those will kill the bees there. They're not going to bring those pesticides back to your hive. What you have to worry about as far as pesticides are concerned are sublethal doses, because the honey, the comb, the wax will absorb pesticides over time, and that's a whole other class about rotating your comb and stuff like that. But basically, you want to keep your hives away from where they're going to get sprayed. If you live in town and you hear on the news that they found, what is it, West Nile virus, right? And so now the city's going to start spraying for mosquitoes. Um, at least here in Brazos County, you can call the county health department and tell them, I have beehives, and they won't spray in your area. Or if they do, they will call you 24 hours in advance so that you can just take a wet sheet and cover your hives. Now, they're supposed to do it right at dawn or right at dusk when the bees are mostly all inside. Notice I said they're supposed to do it then. They're not always good about that. Protection from theft. Did y'all know that beehives get stolen? That's a thing. It's actually way more of a reality than I ever thought it possibly would be. And we've had kids in our youth program have their hives stolen. We were able to get them replaced and all that stuff, but their hives got stolen. So, you guys, well, if you've been buying your equipment and your bees, you know how much money you put into this. It's not exactly the cheapest hobby in the world. It's not the most expensive, but it's not the cheapest hobby. Um, but those things do have some value, especially come January or June and July. If you've got honey boxes sitting on your hive, sometimes people come and just take your honey crop. When $10 a pound and what you get, 40 pounds per honey super. That's $400 with the honey in the box. Basically, if you can have your hives where you can keep an eye on them, like not too far away, that's a good thing. If you do put them on your property that's somewhere else, game cameras. Of course, people steal trail cameras too. So, just do whatever you can to kind of keep in mind, lock gates and all that good stuff. I am not a security expert. We have a couple of guys who are police officers in our club who are. You can probably talk to them sometime. Okay, leaving yourself some working room. I talked about between the hives, but it also applies to behind the hives. And I didn't used to have this slide here, which is probably why it's kind of misplaced. But after having a bunch of kids in our youth program, I'd go out and mess with their hives. I'd go out there and their hives are butted right up against a wall. Well, when you're working your beehives, a lot of times people don't really get told this. You want to work your hives from behind, right? Not right in front of the entrance where they're flying in and out. So, leave yourself a good 3 or 4 feet behind the hives so that you have room to work. Or if you want to run a lawnmower back there, if you've got a 60-inch cut mower on your mower deck, run your mower back there once before you put your hives there so that you know that you have enough room. Um, let's just ease on yourselves. Okay, accessing your hives with all your stuff. Um, this is another slide that I added after going out and helping other people. Those who have come out to my place, they've probably seen me with, we have a zero turn mower with a trailer hitch on the back of it and the little utility trailer that we'll pull up to our barn and we'll load beehive boxes and, you know, things of sugar water and our smoker and some smoker fuel and whatever else we might need out there. And, you know, by the time we're done, our little utility trailer probably has 200 pounds worth of junk on it. Um, if you have your hives out somewhere that you have to carry all that stuff, you're not going to go check your hives very often. Probably not as often as you should. So I strongly recommend that you put your hives somewhere that you can drive up to them. Whether it's a truck or your car or an ATV or a lawnmower with a trailer on it, whatever you have. Especially when it comes time to start collecting honey. You know, if you only have 2 hives, but they each have 2 boxes full of honey, well, that's 48, that's 160 pounds of honey. Who wants to carry that back to their house 1 box at a time? Okay. Hive stands. Okay. This is more, okay, now that we've talked about where to put your hives, this is like, what do you put them on? There is not really a right or wrong here. I would almost say there's almost no wrongs here. There are some things that work better than others. Um, you do not have to spend a ton of money on hive stands. Um, I've seen some for sale groups, beekeeping related for sale groups, where they sell really nice, you know, metal hive stands that are like 180 bucks a piece. Um, I think, well, my hive stands tend to be 6 cinder blocks, which if you buy them new, they're $1.50 a piece, and 2 4x4 posts, which those have gone up. I think those are like $7 a piece now. So I spend what, 14 plus 9, so $23 on my hive stands, and I can put 3 hives on them. And it just doesn't have to be expensive. There are a couple of things that you do want to keep in mind. One, you don't necessarily want it to be placed such that you can't move it later on, especially when you're first getting started. Because when I first got started, I put hive stands and I pounded them in the ground. And then later on, I figured out, you know, this isn't the best place for these hives. I really need to move them, you know, 40 feet this way. Well, it's a pain to have to pull all this stuff up out of the ground, especially I've seen people concrete them in or do all kinds of stuff like that. And it's like, it's just work you don't have to do. Um, Most commercial guys will use pallets, like I mentioned. And part of the reason for that is because they use forklifts to pick up their hives and load them on trucks when they get ready to send them to California for pollination. Pallets, even if you're not moving them around, they're the perfect size. So, you know, if you wanted to use pallets, go for it. Um, the one thing I have seen some people do, and it's okay when you've got your hive and it's brand new and it's only 1 box, they'll put their hive stand so that, you know, it's up here. And so their box is up here and they take the lid off and it's just all right here. So they're not bending over, but, you know, then they put the second box on it and then a honey super, honey super, and pretty soon you're trying to lift boxes up that are above your head. Generally, and this is one reason why I like those 2 cinder blocks stacked with the 4x4 posts, it puts them at the perfect height, because I do have to bend over a little bit when it's 1 box, When it's 2 boxes, everything's pretty much there. If I've got 2 or 3 supers on it, I'm not having to get a ladder to get everything. The other thing that it does, and I think my next slide. Okay, here's a picture of what my hive stands look like. The height of where I actually have my 4x4 post sitting on top of the second cinder blocks now, just because it lets me spread them out a little bit better. But that height, if you think about what a skunk does when they try to come up and get into a hive, a skunk will put its front 2 paws on the entrance and expose its belly, which then all the guard bees can come out and they have a nice little place to sting these skunks or raccoons or whatever is trying to get in there. To me, that's the perfect hive stand. Underneath it, I do have an old sheet of plywood just so that I don't have to mow or weed eat underneath the hive. And that's just because I don't like weeds growing around my hives. I've seen a lot of people with their hives out in the middle of the bush, and you kind of have to take a machete to clear everything, but they're happy with it that way. So it's whatever you like. That's it. Questions? We have a microphone for questions. Yeah. No questions at all? And I finished 15 minutes ahead of time. Okay. All right. For those on Facebook, I'm gonna pause the recording, but I'm not gonna close it. We will pick up again at 7 for the regular meeting.
My name is Justin Russell, and I am going to be your acting president for Brazos Valley Beekeepers now. So this is my first time up here talking as any type of board member or anything for the club, but I have been a member of the club for quite some time. So if I misstep or anything, I don't mind if you guys yell at me. I'm pretty loose like that. So we're going to go through announcements really quick, and then we're going to have Jackie from B. Weaver talk. So let's go forward. There we go. So the announcements, it looks like $25 for Brazos Valley Beekeeper to join, which is going to give you access to our Facebook group that is private, and it also gets you basically with us. Next thing is discounts to the workshops and seminars sponsored by the association. So in the fall, Brazos Valley Beekeepers, pre-COVID time anyway, we like to do a bee school, and so it's going to include that, and then also you can volunteer to work the bee school. We do have a lending library of reference books for our club, yes or no? And if so, who has that? Okay. Yeah. Then also our club does have an extractor and honey extracting equipment, which is a great tool to have, especially if you're just getting into beekeeping and you don't have your own stuff to use, because extractor can be a large expense, especially a better one whenever you first get into it, because no one wants to go and drop the money on it maybe the first year, and make sure that they enjoy doing it. So we do have an extractor, and all we ask is that you clean it after you get done using it. And it's usually over at the Barnes's house, usually. There we go. Sorry, College Station. Yes. So that was saying that Catherine has one of the extractors in West Bryan, and then in East Bryan, we're going to have another extractor at the Barnes's house. And then, yeah, I did not prepare for this. It's okay. Knowing that your dues help offset the ongoing costs of the club, such as speaker fees, youth programming, outreach program, to make the Brazos Valley Beekeeper even better. So whenever we do have speakers up here We don't pay them a lot, but we do like to give them some money to entice people to come and talk to us. A lot of people would do it for free, but as we all know, time is money, and it costs gas and everything else to get here. So we like to be able to at least offset a little bit of that. And then also being a member does allow you to vote in the annual election, which depending what's going on, if we're going to have one or not. So let's see if I can fast. Yeah, and that is a reminder, as Ashley said, that everybody's dues are due in January as a renewal. Can we next slide? I can't.
Oh.
Yeah, there. Okay. Yep. So there's the announcement. Hey, club dues are due this month. If you need a receipt, just please ask for one on the form. We do have the website up, so you can do it through there. And then also, remember, the club will remove you if you don't pay by March. Looks like we're having a nomination for chair of B School. Do we want to do that tonight? Chris? I have a nomination for Chris Barnes from Ashley Ralph. Can I get a second? Second. Can I get all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Chris, congratulations. It's that easy. Yep. So our chair of B School is going to be Chris Barnes. If y'all don't know Chris, Chris is the one who started the club, and he is the one who runs our B School. And so we just kind of shoot him in, and it'll be okay. So we do have our next meeting on the 16th of February, and are we going to be here? Josh? So tentatively, we are going to be here at this location. And if you're watching on Zoom or Facebook and you don't know where this location is, go to our the website or Facebook page, and you'll be able to figure that out. I believe. All right. That's a cute picture. Hey, I was on some of these, and I'm not getting royalties either, so don't worry. So you go by Jackie, yes?
Yeah, just go by Jackie.
Hey guys, I'd like to introduce Jackie here. She works for Beeweaver, which is a larger commercial operation in Navasota. If you're a beekeeper, you pretty much know who Beeweaver is because of their quality of queen bees. They're very active in the bee community, great people. Jackie, she's been at Beeweaver a couple years now, graduate of Texas A&M, and she's a commercial beekeeper, and she's going to talk to you tonight, guys. All right.
Hey, thanks. Have any of y'all ever been to Beeweaver? Okay, I'm just gonna pass out a couple brochures real quick. It has just really brief information about like installing nukes or packages or your options when it comes to if you want a top bar hive or if you want, just a Langstroth hive. And I also have this other really cool brochure. This has been my favorite that we've got. And it tells you like season by season what you need to do as a beekeeper because it's different from spring, summer, fall, and winter. It's total different things you have to do. So let me pass these out real quick. Let's see. Oh, sure. Wonderful youth. Yeah, just one of each. And if you need more, I have more. I think so. Okay. So I love questions and I don't ever feel interrupted if you just want to just throw them out there because if you're like me, I forget them in a matter of 5 minutes. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, hold on. I work on a bee farm, so I'm not the best with technology. So hold on. What button did you? Yes. Oh, perfect. And you just push this little one right here, right? Like normal arrow. Okay. Yeah, I'll just take them. Oop. And y'all can have these as the association. Y'all can just have these and hand them out whenever you need. Okay. Oops. So the main, topic I'm going to talk about is February through May. So that's usually for new beekeepers about, you're getting ready to get your bees, or if you've had bees, you're transitioning from winter when dormant hives to now, okay, everything's going to start get going. So new beekeepers and kind of general area, just starting off your hive, some basic information just by what, and I will have to say, if you put 50 beekeepers in a room, everyone's going to have kind of different advice. So this is just kind of what I've learned. The best location for your hives we found is actually full sun. Any type of shade we've ever had, those small hive beetles, especially kind of in our area, at least in Navasota and the surrounding counties, the small hive beetles are getting really bad. And we haven't really figured out why, but the best help with that has been just putting them in full sun. I mean, our bees are just in a big old prairie field with no trees. You worry about them overheating, but we have never had a situation where wax starts melting, bees are overheating or anything like that. Oops. Let me go back. Also, another thing, especially in Navasota, a lot of our bee yards are on a hill, so it gets super windy. We like to make sure the entrances aren't facing that north wind. It's just a precautionary thing that we do. I mean, we never really get crazy cold winds, but it does help the bees. And also on less windier days, your bees aren't struggling to get in and out of that hive. You want to have a water source nearby, at least in a mile range. So if that means your bees are flying out to a local pond or your local lake, or even if you just have bird baths, you can put bird baths around water troughs, really anything. Bees are wild. They're going to go and find water. They're going to go and find flowers. You can plant millions of wildflowers right here in the yard like my mom did, and the bees don't touch them. They go to the neighbor's house next door. Yeah, she hates that. So that's just some advice on that. And also, like I heard earlier in the meeting, try to stay away from like the pesticides and the chemicals. We're 100% chemical free at Bee Weaver, so we don't use anything. If it's ant killer, we use Amdro. It's the little powdery kind that is safe for the bees. But when it comes to weeds and stuff, usually we're just pulling them. We're really strict about that. So the next thing, once you find your best location, you have two options. You're either going to get a nuke or a package. For first-time beekeepers, I always recommend a nuke. It will come in a white box, and there will be 4 frames inside. And this kind of goes in hand with your hive. When you're taking your nuke into, you're setting up your hive, you want that brood where you're going to get the eggs, the cat brood in the center of your hive. So when you're always, working your hive and everything like that, you're trying to organize as well. The bees are pretty OCD and they organize everything pretty well, but when you're helping them out by putting that brood in the center, your frames of honey on your side walls, and then kind of the free frames on the sides, that gives that queen the ability to keep laying out and then coming back in, out and in, instead of her getting blocked off by a frame of honey, having to work around it, going to the next frame. It just kind of makes it a smoother flow for the bees, which helps you in the long run. And then when you first do setting up your bees, you always want to do half a feeder. So that has been key in telling people, if you overfeed your bees at the beginning, they're working too hard and they're not really building out the comb. They're trying to focus too much on the honey production. And then hive checkups. When you're first starting out, a lot of beekeepers want to go in weekly, like, oh, I love my bees, I want to go see them. It actually hurts them a lot. The more you go to them, the more problems that we find. There's bees that I go visit twice, every 2 months maybe for a hive management, and those bees are so powerful and strong. The bees that I go in a little bit too much, they just seem bothered. And again, that's where bees are wild. They kind of want to do their own thing. Now, if there's problems, you go in there more often. Any questions? The feeding, just that first time, just fill up that feeder. You'll have an in-hive feeder, especially if you get a nuke. You're not doing an in-hive feeder? Are you doing, what kind of feeder? Uh-huh. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's fine. That's not as large. You can just fill that up. Sometimes those in-hive feeders, those black feeders, there's the double ones, and then there's the single ones. Yeah, that'll be okay. It's like a regular mason jar that screws on there, right? Yeah. You can always overfeed your bees. There's a whole slide about feeding bees because I kind of wanted to touch on that. That's a huge kind of problem that is happening is overfeeding. Oh, interrupt, please, please, please. I'll definitely talk a lot about feeding. Like that was a big part of the conversation. Okay, so when you first get your bees, I just want to show you what healthy hives look like. I love that because I took these pictures. So as a beekeeper, when you pull out this frame, you're like, yes, my bees are doing fabulous. Okay, so the first thing you want to look for in your healthy hive is this solid brood pattern. So if you will need to come up closer and look, or the back wall might be a little bit clearer. So what I mean by solid cap brood is underneath that little part that's capped is eggs. Eventually a baby bee will hatch around 21 days. When you have that nice solid pattern, if it's either a ring or the full frame, it's just showing you have a healthy queen. That's the first sign that your queen is just A game, ready to go. Another thing you want to look for is stored honey and pollen. A lot of the times bees will either save a frame for that, or like most of the bees we have, they'll actually make a ring around the brood as with honey and pollen as easy way to feed those bees, those baby bees and stuff. It's like quick access, little food for them to reach. And another sign of a healthy hive is, of course, lots of activity. You know, you walk out, your bees are going in and out, in and out. Now, if you walk by and you're like, where are my bees? I don't see anything. You know, that's kind of a sign that something's going on. But if you have this going on, you're doing great. You're on the right track. Another big question is when to add a super. That's like when people come in all the time. So the best thing, two things to look for is bearding. So that's when bees start making these big clumps on the outside. They usually do that because it's too packed inside and it's getting too hot and they're trying to cool off because there's too many bees, or sometimes it's just that hot in Texas, where last year over the summer we had some 110, 112, 15, 115 days where those bees actually just started bearding on the outside. But generally they start doing that when it's getting a little too crammed in there. Also, if you crack open your hive and you just have gunks and gunks of honey everywhere, I mean, your feeder's packed, the bees don't have any basically walking room. That's how I kind of like to explain it. If the bees are those frames start getting thick. You know, you just have the single beeswax foundation frame that ends up becoming at least a couple inches thick. That the bees need that mobility to go up and down and move and stuff like that. So you'll know is when you crack that lid open and there's bees, hundreds and hundreds of bees. And that's kind of like the general rule of like when to add a super. And also when all your frames, if you're doing 10 or 8, they're all being used for something. If there's still some frames that aren't even being touched, then rule of thumb is, okay, it's not ready for a super. You want everything used and ready, used by the bees. And also, if you ever want to make a split, make sure you put a deep on top. So you'll have your brood box, your one deep, and if you eventually want to make a split, you want to add another deep on top of that. So that way the bees are working. Do y'all know what a split is? Okay, yeah, because if you go ahead and put a honey super on, then you have to deal about putting then a deep underneath. But the best way if you're trying to increase the number of hives, which most people are doing right now because of ag exemption, you're going to want to make splits because buying hives over and over again gets really expensive. So the best thing is make splits from your bees, and then you have double the numbers. So go ahead and think about putting 2 deeps, and then once there's at least about 4 frames of brood, and top and bottom, you can go ahead and split that. Keep the original queen with the original, and then the new queen. So things to look out for. I showed you that really nice, pretty brood, nice solid. Things start to get a little iffy whenever you start seeing chewed up larvae. That's a really huge sign. A lot of discolored larvae is when actually the worker bees will chew up the larvae because they're either infested with mites, there's an issue going on, or sometimes even small hive beetles will start chewing up that larva. So that's why you really want to, get a hold of that small hive beetle issue. Another thing to look out for is the really spotty brood. Sometimes it will look like that because they're hatching. So you got to make sure you look out for, okay, is this hatching or is my queen just laying really spotty? Because if your queen is starting to stay a little spotty, there's something going on. You'll need to go ahead and requeen her. That's our number 1 fix for everything. Just requeen. Okay, these are the small hive beetles I was talking about. This is so gross to me. So there are these little, this is what it looks like when you, none of these little wormies were out when I pulled the frame out. I got into the sun and thousands, and I mean thousands of these little larvae started coming out these frames. And it's crazy how the sunlight makes them just start crawling out. But what the small hive beetles do is they make it super slimy and they make it gross in the hive. Like as you can see in that last picture, that was a hive that was completely overtaken by hive beetles. They make it so gross that the bees leave. They're like, screw it, we're out. So when you start seeing 1 or 2 hive beetles, go ahead and get on the ball of either, we have, at Bee Weaver, we have Beetle Be Gone or beetle traps. Those are the chemical-free options. You can also do it, preventative by putting your hives on like rocks or like he had mentioned on a piece of wood or something like that, because that damp ground they just live in. And also keep them away from tree lines. So I do hive management at Bee Weaver. So that means I go out to people's properties, take care of their bees for them. They get the ag exemption. They don't have to touch the bees. Win-win. A lot of them put them on their tree line. And then because they're so close to the tree line, the small hive beetles become absolutely terrible because those beetles are all in that moist, damp ground coming from the trees, and then all, so I always say put them out in the sun, move them out a little bit, try to keep it as clear as possible so you can avoid small hive beetles. Usually the sun will take care of them, but there are times when they're just really bad, and that's when you just got to be really adamant about the beetle be gone and become a ninja with killing them. If you've ever seen Dan Weaver work a hive and there's small hive beetles, he's like at it like yeah, exactly. I get yelled at sometimes. He's like, you're not smushing. I'm like, I don't want to smush the bees. The next thing is varroa mites. So this is one of those, there's chemical ways to treat them, but Bee Weaver doesn't. So how we treat them is requeening. There's Apigar, there's all kinds of different things that you could use, but we found, well, and because we're chemical free, we can't do it. But requeening, because it takes care of the situation. That new queen is coming in, laying those fresh, strong babies, which will eventually they can take care of it, clean it all out. But that's that little red tick you can see causes a lot of issues in the hives. You can remember I told you about that spotty brood. Sometimes that's a cause of mites. You'll also see little deformed babies, little bees, where their wings will be all crinkled up. That's another thing to look out for. If you start seeing a lot of deformed wings and stuff like that, go ahead and like requeen. That's a good way. Requeening. What I have been, taught and everything is when that queen has already been, issued with the mites, she's already kind of worn down. The way you kill that queen, you bring in a new queen that's, going to lay these fresh, new, strong ones, and then they can eventually take over back the hive and clean it out themselves. Because at the end of the day, they are wild bees. They're usually able to fix their own problems. But if you have so many bees in the hive that are already either having some type of issue because of the mites and stuff, they're not strong enough to defend themselves, they're not strong enough to eat. A lot of times when we don't requeen a hive that's mites, they'll end up dying out just because they're not strong enough. So that's something we found. Yeah. It will, it's more of when we put, you're basically wiping out the population that was infected and you're bringing in a stronger one. So it's, you're not going to completely lose your hive, but you're kind of replacing the bees. Exactly, kind in that sense of way. Wax moths, the second grossest thing I've ever seen. There's these little maggots, and a lot of people say, you know, I lost my hive, wax moths appeared. Well, usually wax moths come when your hive's already on the down end, and a lot of people don't understand that. Wax moths just come in, like when your hive's weak, for instance, just say mites came in or small hive beetles, and you just have a little patch of bees and they're trying to fight in. Those wax moths will smell that nice, beautiful beeswax, and they'll just get in there and they'll completely chew it up. And what they'll do is they'll make this webbing and stuff like that. And they'll, as you can see over here, there's webbing, and they live in these little crusty little, what are shells, I guess, and then that's when they hatch, and then there'll be a moth. And once you have that, you can't reuse your frame. So if your hive is dying, go ahead, either put those bees on a stronger hive, kind of conjoin them, or you're just going to have to let the bees go somehow and save your frames, because those wax moths will get in there and just chew it all up, and you'll lose all of your foundation, all of your frames, and it just loss of money. And these are gross. I hate them. I don't know if I could show you the video of the small hive beetle, that the video that corresponds to that picture I showed of the sliminess. Like I will, team, I almost threw up because it smelled so bad. But these are like maggots. They literally look like fat, juicy maggots. So either way, for wax moth, it could, they multiply quickly. I mean, in a matter of a week. I had a nuke sitting out. It didn't have any. It was old comb and stuff like that, or it was in this, an old nuke just sitting by some wet ground. And in a matter of a week, I mean, there was millions of those little larvae in there. Like they duplicate very fast. But if you're able to put like the sheets in there and stuff like that, and you're killing them and you change it and stuff like that, you can control it. Like it doesn't get out of hand. Oops. Oh, okay. Just a little bit more about requeening. So queens live 3 to 5 years. A lot of people say, you know, it's good to requeen yearly. It's all based on your preference and what you believe. We go ahead and just requeen when it's needed, because we found red dot queens. I don't know if any of y'all buy bee weaver queens. The strongest hives we have seen so far. So it just, don't kill them just because, oh, they're a year old. Just go by based off their, you know, what they're doing, the quality of their laying. Exactly. Other reasons to requeen could be she's became a drone layer, where she's laying nothing but drones, or you have laying workers, and that's all like really into depth information. I can go in more in, it's just up to what y'all need. But that's what she'll come in, this little queen cage right here, depending on who y'all buy from. And this is just some examples of like when to requeen. That top left picture is actually laying workers. So you'll notice, because there's like 5 to 6 eggs in each hole. Whereas because laying workers, the worker bees are laying eggs because they know, okay, our queen's not doing something, or we don't have a queen, but they can't physically lay eggs properly. So they'll actually end up laying like 5 or 6 eggs, and none of them ever turn into anything but drones, because they're not fertilized. And then also, if you start seeing a bunch of queen cups, those are what you see up there. That's usually so the hive is trying to raise their own queen. You can either take the risk and let, you know, one of them hatch, or you tear them down and put a queen in yourself. It's if you want to take that risk or not. Okay, will this queen work properly, or should I just put one in there? And then on the bottom is a drone layer. So as you can see, that's all just drone brood rather than that nice flat regular solid brood that I showed you from that healthy hive. Oops. You can. It's a little bit different. I learned from the commercial beekeeping side where we have an abundance of queen all the time. So we actually, our preferred method is putting a queen in ourselves because it's a 50-50 chance if that queen's going to be, you know, what you need to do. So we just usually just requeen because we have access to that. But I know personally a couple beekeepers who save their bee, you know, their queen cups and stuff like that. Feeding bees. One of the most important parts of it, because you can lose your hive from it. When to feed, especially when you're starting off, you want all your frames to be built out. So you'll get just foundation frames or plastic frames, whatever y'all decide. And they're going to use that syrup to actually draw at that comb. It'll be that nice yellowy, beautiful look to it. Also, when to feed, is there any honey being stored at all? You'll be able to see it because you can actually take that capping off and the honey will run out. And also only feed to your population of bees. Sometimes people think, okay, my bees look weak. They're a small amount. Let me go ahead and give them a full feeder. Maybe that'll shrink them up. It actually does the opposite. It really makes them overwork the little bees that are there because they're like, okay, like we're hungry. We need to turn this all into, you know, honey. We need to store it. So if it's just a small amount of bees, just feed them a little bit. You can always go back and feed more a week or two later, but just don't go crazy with it just because you see that your bees are weak. That makes sense. Okay. And then again, if you have a huge, crazy booming hive, go ahead and give them a full feeder. They're able to break that down, you know, turn it in and not waste so much energy just on that. And then when to stop feeding. So if you want me to go by month to month around, so over the winter time, your hive should have honey. If not, you feed them towards the beginning, you know, let them make some honey and then you feed them. This depends on how much they store. You want to discontinue feeding when all the frames are drawn out. We all go by at least 2 frames of stored honey. So when you have your brood box, we'll want to say at least your sidewall should always be full of honey. If it's empty, you have to feed your bees. A lot of new beekeepers kind of fail on that end because they forget that you got to kind of feed your bees and they will die off, they'll swarm, they'll leave. You know, there's a lot of options that bees will take when it comes to being hungry. And also like around the summer, late spring, you feed less because they actually have access to nectar then. In early winter, you feed them a little bit more to prepare them for winter, but then during winter, you don't feed them a lot either. So it's kind of like a judgment call let me see if I can have, I didn't add it. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. I actually have like an actual list. Let me see if I can find it after the presentation. But to make sugar water, it's 1 gallon of water to 8 pounds of sugar. You just warm it up. And you actually can water it down during certain times of the month and make it thicker. Yes, that's how all of our syrup is made. Oh, repeat. It was. He just basically asked, was it a 1-to-1 by volume or 1-to-1 by weight? And based off of this, it's by weight. So 1 gallon of water to 8 pounds of sugar. That's how we make it. Around summer, like late summer, we start adding a little bit more water to it because they have so much honey already going on. Yes. I have not. Oh, I have not. No. They'll take it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of feeding options. There's, you know, pollen patties. There's all kinds of cakes you can make and stuff like that. It's so many different things, but yeah, I understand what that's. I'll be honest, when I work my personal bees, I just whatever sugar my mom has in the cabinet, how much water I can pour in the cup, and that's what I'll make. You know, bees are bees, they'll take what they get. So, and always remember they're wild. So some things happen, and a lot of new beekeepers, you know, you're like, my first year that didn't make it, you know, don't. There's always learning to do. But any questions? I will answer anything. Or I'll repeat. Do you want me to repeat what he asked? Okay. Okay. Any questions? Anything specific? Are you a nuke, right? You ordered a nuke? Oh, a package? Okay. So is it just the 3 pounds of bees? Okay. Okay. We usually say at least I tell people 2 weeks, about 1.5 to 2 weeks. You want them to get settled. So you have their feeder, you fed them, or you know, you have the feeder and stuff. Mostly what you're gonna check for, did that queen accept? So you can go in 5 days after it just depends on your prep. There's not a specific like, God, you have to wait 2 weeks or you have to wait 1 week. You just don't want to go in there day 3, you know, when they're just getting settled and stuff like that. Yeah, I check all of mine after a week. That gives that queen, sometimes the queen takes more than 3 to 5 days to get settled in there and start laying. And that's a good judgment also of like, okay, like, is it ready, you know, and stuff like that. Yeah. Nope, that queen has a pheromone. So they'll know where their flight is, and you can, doesn't all white, all pink, it doesn't matter. Hey, it makes it look pretty. We make my hives are Pixar cartoons, so it looks like Mike Wazowski, Nemo. So it's like the boxes are like coordinated to what they would be. So, keep pretty. Yes, sir. He asked, what's the process of requeening? So the first step is, you know, being 100% sure you have to requeen, because a lot of times the queen just might stop laying, or, you know, once you have found out you're queenless or you need to requeen, you'll go ahead and we recommend having your queen first. Don't go ahead and kill your old queen, because what if you order a queen and something like the male doesn't deliver it right? You know, then you're leaving your queen too many, you know, leaving your hive too many days without a queen. You'll get that queen cage. This is how we do it. I mean, there's hundreds of different ways that people do this. So get your little queen. You'll go ahead and kill that old queen. And then you're going to take that little queen. Let me see if I can pull that picture up of the queen cage. So one side, this side has candy in there, so there will be little attendee bees, like worker bees in there with the queen. And you'll pull out the cork on the candy side, where it has that little white side right there. You'll pull that out. You'll have your frames, and you're going to turn that screen upside down, or you can have it facing up, but you don't want the screen on the frames, because then all those bees in the hive can't attend to the queens and they can't feed each other. So you want to have that screen visible. And then 3 to 5 days, the worker bees and the other hives will actually chew their way through that white candy that we put in there. And then that 3 to 5 days gets the hive time to adapt to the new queen. And then after that, whenever, you know how long it takes to eat through that candy, then that queen will come out and hopefully start laying. Because you can't just put a queen directly in there, they'll kill her. They need time to adapt. Sometimes on the 3rd, 5th day, they still haven't chewed it out all the way. You can at times go ahead and lift her, especially if you notice the bees from the hive aren't clinging to the cage, because that's usually a sign that they haven't accepted her. They're going in for the kill. But if they're just moseying around, just trying to eat that candy white, you can release them after that 5th day. But that's our preference of way. Yes. Okay. Yes, the question was, can we move bees in on a cold, sunny day in the middle of the day? We did. It has to be cold enough where the bees aren't flying. Can't be 56 degrees and the sun's out. Bees are loving that time right now. The best time again is in, early in the morning or late at night. That's when I transfer my hives to Houston, unless you have like a net and all that, but it's not recommended in the daytime unless it's cold. So it's possible as long as the bees aren't flying. 50 and below is textbook. Our bees were flying around right after it snowed. So I think Texas bees are a little bit different. I mean, at 30s, that was when we noted like constant 30s. Because after that snow day, those bees were nuts. I haven't seen those bees flying around like that in a long time. It was really exciting. So they're getting ready for spring. Is there any other questions? Simple, basic, anything? Yes, I did mention that. Yeah, once that queen is out, once the workers are done, you can go ahead and remove that queen cage box. And usually I like, if you have an in-hive feeder, I just throw it right in the feeder as another flotation device. Because you want to always have something, if you're using in-hive feeders, put some stuff in there to let them flow or else they're going to drown. Unless you have cap and ladder feeders. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, keep the feed going and until they've at least drawn out all their foundation, all your frames. Just keep. Exactly, because they'll use that syrup to draw that comb. And then once you start noticing, okay, you're still going to need to feed them a little bit longer, so they'll start storing it. But then by now, because you're getting your bees this spring, right? Usually about a month of them in there, they'll start, going to get some nectar and stuff. For which, so what part? Oh, like how do we put them in there? We pick them one by one and put them through the open cork side. Yeah, that's the one job that I hate because for some reason I just get stung every bee I try to pick up, so it's not for me. Huh? Anna Rosa? Yeah, Anna Rosa, the 4 queen ladies. Man, it took me like 30 minutes to make one cage one time, and then they make like 30 in a matter of like 2 minutes. Like they just pick them up like little popcorn. It's crazy. But yeah, we just shove them in there to take care of the queen and also to help eat their way through that candy. But and also the ones from the out, but they're also making sure that queen is taken care of. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The candy side. So again, this is where every beekeeper has their own advice. We always try to keep it at a degree as well. The Houston, you never want also the candy can start melting if you have it on top, then it gets on all the bees. So you want candy side down. Yeah. So if, for instance, this is the box, you want the candy side kind of down here and then your bees. Good question. Any other questions? Thank you. And I am willing to share the slides if you ever want to look at the pictures up close. You're welcome.